Chapter 8. The Amazing Dougal Keen. Your reputation precedes you. General Almora Soulkeeper thumped a fist over her heart, char style, and extended a paw. Dougal could feel a cold trickle of sweat drip down his back as he gripped the char's firm, strong hand, which wrapped around his own, the nubs of her sheathed claws grazing the back of it. The general gestured to the chairs opposite the broad table. The two humans and the Sylvari took their seats, and the char lifted an ear. Wine? This is a good vintage from the Almutin estate. Colleen said, thank you. Dougal said, I may need the drink. Riona said nothing, but nodded respectfully. Dougal was amazed by her sudden change in attitude from the violent warrior of an hour before. Almora poured the wine into 4 goblets and offered one to each guest. Then she raised her glass and said, Death and despair to the dragons and their minions. Death and despair, repeated Riona. Dougal and Colleen looked at each other, said nothing, but raised their glasses in response. Dougal sipped his wine. The char was right. It was a good vintage. A pity we could not meet in Vigil Keep north of the city, said Almora, seating herself on a wide bench, the type preferred by the char. It is a proper and more secure place for such discussions. But when Crusader Riona's message arrived that she had located you, I thought it best to meet here. Still, the Vigil appreciates your efforts on our behalf. I've made no real efforts so far, said Dougal, shrugging, and I will make none until I understand what exactly you want. I've agreed to come here and talk, nothing more. Almora looked sharply at Riona, her 4 ears flattening slightly. You did not tell him. Riona looked almost abashed. I thought it best if he were briefed once we arrived. It was difficult enough getting him here. Almora let out a noise halfway between a purr and a grunt and said, What do you know of our organization? Colleen said abruptly, The Vigil is a group made up of members of many races, nations, and guilds. They are dedicated to resisting the depredations of the Elder Dragons by force of arms. Riona scowled at her interruption, but Colleen ignored her. General Soulkeeper nodded. We have a number of your people in our organization, including my second in command. Your knowledge is always appreciated. You want to fight dragons, said Dougal. Almora nodded. But you don't want me to fight dragons, so I've been told. He motioned to Riona, and Almora nodded again. You've been to Ascalon City, said the general. So people keep reminding me, said Dougal. What do you want that's in Ascalon City? We seek the claw of the Connor, said Almora simply. She took a long sip of her wine and let the silence in the room draw out. Finally, Dougal said, You're completely mad, you know. Others have suggested that, said Almora. Most of them have been char. There was a mild sense of menace in her words that Dougal always heard from the char, intended or not. Why would you want the claw? He asked. I'm sorry, said Colleen. This one I don't know. What is the claw of the Connor? Riona looked into her goblet. A legendary weapon, highly valued by the char legions. It's an ungu, a 4-bladed weapon with a central grip. 2 blades jut forward, 2 blades backward. More importantly, said Almora, the Connor was, in ancient times, the ruler of all char legions. Iron, ash, blood, and flame. The claw was a symbol of unity among the char. The last time the legions were fully united, it was lost in Ascalon City. In the Fofire, said Dougal. We have reason to believe that it is still there, said the general. Dougal looked at Riona, who, from her uncertain expression, fully expected Dougal to leap to his feet and try to find the nearest exit. Instead, he remained seated and said, Why do the Vigil want a char artifact? We don't, said Almora. Your human queen wants it. Very well, said Dougal, feeling as though he were being lectured by an Azura. Why does Queen Jenna want it? She wants to give it back to the char, said Almora, and Dougal shot a glance at Riona. She said nothing, but was scowling. Dougal shook his head and said, Obviously I missed a step here. General Soulkeeper leaned forward and put her paws on the table. Your people and mine have been fighting for how long now? Since the Searing, said Dougal. Longer, said Almora. When man first came to Tyria, the char were here, and its lands were our hunting grounds. All its creatures our prey. Your people drove us northward to found their kingdoms and resisted us when we rightfully sought to regain our land. Riona stiffened at Almora's words, but said nothing. Again, the sense of challenge was in the Char General's voice. Since then, there have been victories and reverses for both sides, she continued. The human nations are now gone from the east of the Shiver Peaks, with the exception of the fortress city of Ebonhawk, which has been besieged for generations. A siege that has so far failed, I should note, said Dougal, feeling he had to speak up for his original home. And the conflicts between Char and man land have blown hot and cold for generations, but now there stands a chance for peace, said Almora. I find that hard to believe, said Dougal. Both sides are tired, said Almora, and both sides have other worries in their lives. The humans have been driven back on numerous fronts, almost to the gates of Divinity's Reach itself. You are plagued by marauding centaurs and human brigands. Similarly, the general went on, 3 of the Char Legions stand united, blood, iron, and ash. The 4th, the Flame Legion, which once commanded the other 3, stands against us, and the ogres have come down from the Blaze Ridge Mountains seeking land for their herds. And Ascalon is haunted, added Dougal. And Ascalon is haunted, agreed Almora, the legacy of the Foefire. So how does the Claw fit in, said Dougal. A peace faction has grown among the Char, said Almora. Then stop. Perhaps I give my people too much credit. Call it a truce faction. They seek to end the hostilities with Ebonhawk so that they may better deal with the Flame Legion and other matters. And the humans, as you noticed, said Riona flatly, have other foes as well. The Vigil has been acting as go-between, said Almora. We have human agents in Divinity's Reach and Char Crusaders in the Black Citadel. The discussions have been extremely secretive to date. There are humans and Char who would reject out of hand any attempt at peace and ban our order from promoting it. The Char General leaned forward again. The discussions have gotten to the point that the Char Legions have agreed to open formal negotiations, combined with a cessation of hostilities, but they want a sign of good faith from the humans. The Claw, said Dougal. The Claw, said General Soulkeeper. What is in all this for you? Asked Dougal. The Elder Dragons, said Colleen, and Dougal looked at her. She had been listening intently throughout the discussion. If the humans and Char can stop fighting, you hope they can turn their armies against Zaitan, Kralkatorrik, and the others. Riona nodded curtly, and Almora said, the Sylvari have a talent for cutting to the heart of the matter. Do the legions know the claws in Ascalon City? Said Dougal. They suspect, said the general, but those who have attempted to find it have never come back out. You did. I was lucky, said Dougal, more to himself than anyone else. We could use that luck again, said Almora. There was a long silence in the room. At last, Dougal said, you are completely mad. The world is mad, General Soulkeeper observed. We merely have to deal with it. All of Ascalon is haunted. Ascalon City is the heart of the Foefire and is overrun with ghosts. There's a reason the legions have never conquered it, said Dougal. Yet, you went there and came out alive, said the general. I was young, said Dougal. And stupid. He looked at Riona, but the other human's face was unexpressive as a stone. And yet, you are alive, said Almora. No, said Dougal. I am sorry, but I am not interested in returning to Ascalon City. The Char General, leader of the Vigil, blinked and her ears flattened. You agreed to come here. I agreed to listen to your proposal, said Dougal. I did that. Now I am saying no, because you are chasing a madman's dream, and I will not be part of it. I'd like to go now. Dougal stood up, hefting his small pack over his shoulder. Colleen and Riona also stood up, but more slowly. Another silence, and Dougal could almost feel the tension gathering in the room. Finally, General Soulkeeper stood up and said, of course, I'd like you to think about it, but I will respect your decision. If you could wait outside for a moment, I'd like to speak to Crusader Riona. Dougal looked at Riona and raised an eyebrow, but the other human kept her eyes fixed on the general. Dougal and Colleen left the room. The Hylic Naglotl opened the door and escorted them back to the waiting area. As he closed the door to the meeting room behind him, Dougal caught Almora's raising voice. You mean you never told him what we wanted? Then the door closed and muffled the angry voice of the Char General. In the waiting area, Dougal sat down and looked at his hands. Colleen remained standing. I'm not afraid, started Dougal. I want you to know that. I'm going, said Colleen. Dougal looked up and saw the sincerity of the Sylvari's face. Colleen, you don't know. No, I don't, she said. But I want to find out. I think what they're doing is for the best. For humans, for Char, for everyone. Dougal shook his head, but Colleen pressed on. Your races are fortunate. You've been here forever. My people have been here for 25 years and have never known a world where the Elder Dragons were not present, gnawing at the corners of our land, bringing us zombies and abominations and all forms of twisted creatures in their wake. My people are here for a reason. I think the dragons are that reason. And if I can do anything to help the other races put aside their squabbles and turn to a greater danger, I will do it. Colleen, said Dougal. Even the Char legions give Ascalon City a wide berth. It's a city filled with ghosts. Necromancer, reminded the Sylvari, smiling. That argument is not going to have a lot of traction. You don't stand a chance without me, said Dougal, standing up, looking down at her smiling green face. You should lead us then, said Colleen. She shook her head at some private joke and then reached up and touched his forehead. You humans, you think too much up here. She moved her hand down, resting it on his chest, her fingers grazing the locket that hung around his neck. You should be thinking from here as well. Dougal's face darkened, blushing. He turned away from her. He took a deep breath and said, Colleen. The door opened and Riona entered. Her face was flushed as well, though in her case, from barely contained anger. Dougal could imagine how unpleasant it must have been to be chewed out by a char, especially a superior who is a char. She'd like to talk to you again, she said. Come with me. I think I'll stay here, said Colleen. You two may need a moment. Riona left the room without even seeming to have heard her. In the hallway, Riona turned to him angry. Dougal Keen, what happened to you? Riona, I really don't want to. Dougal started, still shaken from Colleen's words, but Riona would not be denied. You used to take chances. You used to always talk about that big strike, the ultimate prize, that great treasure, the chance to prove the world that you could beat it. I took a big chance, and in taking that chance, we betrayed you, said Dougal. But you lost it, said Riona, ignoring him. Whatever happened in Ascalon City, you lost more than the rest of our platoon. You lost your will. You lost your bravery. You started running and haven't stopped. Are you done? Said Dougal, fixing her with a glare as sharp and angry as her own. Riona's mouth became a thin line. Yes, I think we are. Fine, Dougal said. Now bring me to your general. A minute later, once Riona had left the chamber and closed the door behind her, Dougal said calmly, Now, are you going to yell at me? No, said General Soulkeeper, standing in front of the fire, staring into its depths as if looking for an answer. Instead, I want to tell you a story. I understand you left Ebonhawk 5 years ago, and you have not been back. I thought there was nothing for me there, said Dougal. I was part of the siege of Ebonhawk as well, said Almora. We may have hunted each other, or stared at each other across the battlements, my warband and your patrol. Dougal said nothing but nodded. Almora looked up from the fire to Dougal, and her gaze drifted into the human. Her next words were heavy with emotion and memory. I was there 4 years ago when Kralkatorrik, the crystal dragon, awoke. I was in the dragon brand. Dougal felt slightly ill. I didn't know anyone survived that. Soulkeeper grunted. I served as a legionnaire in the Blood Legion at the time. Our centurion was in charge of interdicting enemy supplies and was overseeing the scores of our finest war bands stationed there. I was on patrol with my own war band in the eastern Ascalon when the crystal dragon stirred. I felt it first rather than heard it. The creature's coming warped everything around it, and the vibration reached me through the air, not as a low thunder, but as a strange feeling that reached into my bones and made every bit of my fur stand on end. Harthog's Soul Slasher, my second in command, saw it before the rest of us, coming over the edge of the mountains behind us, flying in from the north like an angry sun come to Tyria to scorch all of us. Harthog was one of the bravest char I'd ever known, but I saw his eyes bulge with terror as he raised his arm to point at the dragon. The others turned to see what could terrify such a char as Soul Slasher, but I reached out and grabbed my friend by the shoulders to shake the fear from him. As I did, I saw the changes start to take him. His eyes began to glow an unearthly purple, and his muzzle shrank back into his face, becoming like the soft but toothy maw of a giant leech. His fur became transparent as his armor sloughed off his thinning shoulders, and his arms transformed into flailing shard-like claws. The skin peeled back from his face, and his lips and nose and eyelids shriveled up and fell away. And then he turned into living glass, crystallizing in an instant before my eyes, into his twisted form, and at my back I could feel a pressure, like a great hand was pressing down on the entire world as the dragon passed overhead. Despite the fact the dragon soared hundreds of feet above us, its passage turned the land beneath the path of its flight black and transformed the plants into crystalline monstrosities. At the same time, the screams from the rest of my war band tore at my ears. I drew my blade just before the creature that had been Soul Slasher attacked, his splintered claws reaching for me as he screeched in horror at what he had become, and the hunger that now drove him to drool at the thought of devouring me alive. I didn't know what spared me from sharing his fate. Every other member of our war band succumbed to it. I was standing no more than a foot from Harthog, and he and the others were warped beyond recognition. Yet I was spared. I slew the thing that had been Soul Slasher then, but after I tore out his throat, his body kept coming at me. I had to shatter him into pieces to finally put him down. Then I turned in the deafening silence after the dragon's passage and saw the rest of my war band trying to kill each other, each twisted in a unique and horrible way. I waited for my war siblings to tear each other apart, then stepped in to dispatch the survivors as best I could. When it was done, I looked before and behind me and saw that every part of the land that had passed beneath the dragon had been twisted in the same way. The grass shattered under my feet as I walked on it, grinding it into sand. The dragon brand, Dougal breathed the word with horrified respect. Soulkeeper nodded. The curse the dragon laid upon the land stretched for untold miles in the direction of the flight, coming from the north and reaching for the south. Everything in its path had been turned into crystal, the trees, the animals, even the land itself nearby. The worst part of it all is that the dragon didn't care about the destruction it caused. It was going elsewhere, on a mission known only to itself. To it, the dragon brand was worth nothing more than your boot Brits are to you. We might as well have been ants. Everything I lost that day mattered not one bit. I fell into my own personal darkness, my friend slain by a force greater than I could hope to confront. General Almora Soulkeeper seemed to forget that Dougal was there, her lips drawn back over bared teeth. I became a gladium, a char without a warband, and refused any aid in my darkness. At last, with the help of a few unlikely allies, I came to myself and knew what had to be done. I knew that this was no foe that a single people could confront, Soulkeeper said. To have any hope of defeating an elder dragon, the peoples of Tyria would have to band together to fight it. That's why you formed the Vigil, Dougal said. Yes, said Almora. And although I work to save Tyria, I also know I act to save myself. Almora returned to the present time and the firelit chamber. Turning to face Dougal, she said, Crusader Riona told me your companions died when you went to Ascalon City. They were your fellow warriors and your friends. I can understand your reluctance to return there. I have a dozen reasons to stay away, and not one good one to return, said Dougal. Yet, I accept your plan. I will lead a group into Ascalon City. I will find your Claw of the Conqueror, provided, of course, you are willing to pay for my services. Pay, said Almora, suddenly brought up short, as if the idea that payment might be required only had now crossed her mind. Of course, you can keep everything else you find, I suppose, and split it as you see fit with your companions. And our resources are not slender by any means. What do you need? Well, first off, said Dougal, managing a tired, knowing smile, I'll need a new sword.